Please welcome veteran DynamicsCon speaker and Microsoft MVP, Alex Meyer. Today, he will be presenting his session, D365FO, Telemetry and Monitoring Overview. Please stick around after Alex's session for a live Q&A.
All right, we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining today, joining DynamicsCon Virtual, as well as the session on telemetry here. So we'll go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared, and we'll go ahead and get this kicked off. All right, so the session we are going to be going through today is going to be on D365 telemetry and monitoring overview. So hopefully you're in the right session for that. Quick background about myself. My name is Alex Meyer. I'm a principal software development engineer at a company called Delinea, which recently acquired FastPath, which is, if you've heard me speak in the past, where you probably know me from. My contact information is there in the middle. You can feel free to reach out to me. I have a blog, a YouTube channel that I post on quite frequently. I've been an MVP for a couple of years and done this in the US and in Europe. As well. So hopefully you guys are excited to learn about this. This is a really exciting topic for me. I think this opens up a lot of different avenues that we can take this telemetry data and be able to utilize it in the application itself. So quick agenda of what we're going to be looking at today is what are the prereqs for the telemetry data feature, right? So first and foremost, are there things we have to do beforehand before we can actually go and enable the feature? So that's the second thing we're going to look through. And then we're going to look through some different examples of what you can actually capture with this telemetry data, right? So things like form runs, exception events, and custom events. We're going to look for how can we actually take this data and look at it from a external perspective, right? If we want to report on this from a Power BI. And then what can we do from reporting on this, right? If we want to actually consume this in an external application, this telemetry data, right? Can we do that from a .NET or C# application or any other application, right? How do we do that? And then can we actually reuse this telemetry data back in D365 itself, right? So, what can we do on that front? So we have a lot of different avenues to cover here. So let's go ahead and jump in. And as always, I think the Q&A chat is open, so we'll be happy to answer questions throughout this as well. So if you do have questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. All right, so first and foremost, how do we enable this telemetry data and what are the prereqs for it? The first one, I hope everybody is on and meets that requirement, is that you have to be on D365FO 10.0.30 or newer. That's when the first release of the telemetry feature was enabled. The newer version that you're on, the better. The examples we're going to go through today are in a 10.41 environment. So there have been certain issues if you're on different versions, depending on between 10.30 and 10.41. So the newest version you can be on, the better. And the only other requirement in this case from a behind the scenes perspective is that we have to have an application insights or log analytics resource created within Azure. So this type of resource is just a container where we can actually put point the log analytics data to be stored. So this is a resource you can create within your Azure tenant. And the sole purpose of it is to house to collect or house this log data that we're going to store. All right, so first and foremost here, we have to actually go and enable this feature. So this feature by default, when you go in to your environment, will be disabled, and you have to actually go and enable it. So Microsoft is taking the approach that they want to actually have you take that step to say, yes, I would like to enable this. So you notice in this top screenshot, there's under that status column, there's a yellow triangle. That's basically saying that that hasn't been enabled. And then once you actually go and enable it in your feature management portal, right, you'll see it turn green that status icon turn to a green check mark, right? So you can actually see that, yes, this is actually on. Once you enable it, the thing that you'll notice, or the menu that's added, is going to be under your system administration, and it's going to be under your setup area, and then there's going to be monitoring and telemetry parameters, right? So that's the new piece that's added as part of this that you can actually see from the user interface. Once you go to this screen, you'll notice that you do have a couple of different options here from a which event you would like to capture, right? So you can actually go in and say, hey, I would like to capture certain events, but not other events. So this is your first case where you can actually choose or determine or filter down, which types of events you actually want. The ones that we're going to focus on today are going to be the form runs or page views, the X++ exceptions, and then the custom traces and metrics, right? But you'll notice you do have user sessions as well as warehouse events that you can turn on and enable as well. So really, these are going to be different events that you can subscribe to, and then those events are actually stored in your log analytics container. So we'll kind of go into what each of those event types exists or mean as we kind of go through the presentation here. All right. So then the next step, once you determine which events you would like to capture, then you can go in and actually point your F&O environment to your Azure Log Analytics or App Insights container that you have set up. So the first thing you'll want to do is actually point it to the environment ID. So you can see in this case, I have a 10.41 environment. I have an environment ID and LCS. I can take and copy that and put it into the environment ID. I'm going to set the environment mode to development because this is a development environment. There's also test and production. So depending on which type or which tier of environment, right, you would select that. And then under your application insights container, right, you would then go in and say, actually put in that instrumentation key as well as the environment key, instrumentation key and connection string, are the two things that you would pull from here. And those are going to come from your resource in Azure, right? So you can actually go in and see those two values and be able to see that you're going to put those in. So in that case, right, you are basically saying, this is the Azure resource I'm pointing to that I want to store this data in. All right. And so then the next thing is, okay, what does this data look like, right? So if we start with page views, this is probably the easiest example, right? When a user goes to a particular form, they're going to, that action is going to be tracked, right? So Microsoft has added a hook into the form run method, right? So when a form is loaded, the telemetry functionality is fired, and that event is actually stored. So you're able to see the date and time that the user opened the form they opened, the user that performed it. The data entity is stored in that custom dimensions field there in the middle. So you can actually get the legal entity or data area ID, I guess, not data entity, sorry, but the legal entity or company that the user was in, as well as the instance, the F&O instance that you were in as well, and the IP address, the location that the user was at, that type of thing, right? So you're going to get a whole bunch of information about that as well. All right, so the question then becomes can we actually view this data somewhere else, right? So that was actually viewed within within Azure portal itself, right? They have a data workspace there that you can actually view the data in. But what if I want to export this data somewhere else? So on that same portal, you may have noticed that there was a share dropdown that you could actually go to. That share option allows you to select different options that you actually want to take that data to, right? I can export this data to CSV. I can export it. I can copy the link to the query. I can copy the results, right? I can open it in Excel. But one of the things that I can do is export to Power BI. So the nice part is because all of these are Microsoft products, right? They're highly integrated together. And so when you export to Power BI, you have two different options. You can either export it just as an mQuery, which is actually going to give you the query, the raw query that you can actually take, the DAX query that you can take and actually bring into Power BI, or you can actually bring it in as a new data set, which will do all of this behind the scenes for you. So I actually tend to do the inquiry more, simply because then I have a little bit more control over if I want to add filtering or anything like that, I can do it. But you also have the data set there if you would like. At the end of the day, though, right, we're getting the data into Power BI, so it doesn't really matter which option you pick. This is actually looking at the inquiry. So if I actually export that query, bring it over to Power BI, I can just copy and paste. It exports as a text file, which is super nice. And then I can take this and actually bring this into Power BI. I can then actually look at the data that's being brought in at that point, right? So this is the output of that. And then I can start to create visualizations on top of this, right? So fairly quickly, I can start to gain insight into where my users going, what parts of the system are they using. This is just looking at user and where they went to. I can also take a different approach, and if I wanted to, I could look at load times, right? So this doesn't have to just be where did they go, but which pages have the highest load times and things like that, right? So you have a whole bunch of different options as far as the data within F&O itself that you want to, or the telemetry data you want to look at. All right, so that's looking at the page view side and how we can get that into Power BI, right? The second piece to this will be exception events, right? That's another event type that we were looking at there. So if we want to look at the exception events in this case, right, it would be anytime that there's an error being thrown within the application. So in this case, right, we're able to go in and actually see a particular, I created a fake class here, which just has a main method that's going to throw a telemetry error in this case, right? And so when I actually run this, you can see that the error is thrown, right, and displayed back to the user. And so what we can do then is actually see that in this case, instead of selecting from page views, we're actually going to select from the exceptions container, which is a different, each of these events, right, are stored in those different container based on those event types. So the exceptions event, right, is actually going to give me a full stack trace of where this event actually occurred. So if we follow this up, right, you can actually see that the line and of code that actually threw that error is actually shown here, that AM test main method line 8, which is exactly where that exception was thrown, right? So we're actually able to see the entire stack trace from that perspective. So if you want to do error logging of the application, this is a great way to do it. You get a little bit more information, I've found, than even doing like event viewer and other things like that. So definitely an option from there. All right. So that's the event type, or that's the exception event type, right? We looked at the page views initially. Why don't we talk about custom events, right? So this is another area where you can really expand on going above and beyond what Microsoft offers out of the box, right? Because this is where you can start to log events that you would like to actually log, right? So it does require a little X++ coding, but it actually isn't too bad, and we'll show what that looks like here. But one of the scenarios that, just to show the options that you have, right, or how powerful this can be, is one of the scenarios that I can show here, right, is that if I want to do view auditing, right? So for example, if I want to log every time that a user opens a sales order, not makes a change, but just opens the sales order, right, we can use telemetry data the telemetry functionality to help with that, right? So in this case, right, I'm going to go to my all sales order page. I'm going to open up a particular sales order right now. I want to capture that event type. And so if we wanted to go down this path, right, the first thing we would have to do is to start to look at, okay, well, how do I actually log or use these custom events? And so these are really all based on there's some Sys Application Insights telemetry classes. The one that we're going to focus on or utilize is the Sys Application Insights telemetry logger. And we'll actually log an event using that. And all of those classes are going to be under the monitoring and telemetry package, right? So first and foremost, we have to have any code that we have has to reference that package or that other model, right, for us to be able to utilize these classes and methods. The second thing in this case is we have to look at how does this form open, right? Or what's the event lifecycle of when that form opens to show the sales order detail, right? Which event do I want to hook into to actually show, hey, this is the sales order that actually opened. And so going through this is not my graphic here. I actually got the link for where this actually resides is in the PowerPoint, but this is a great overview of the different event types that you can hook into. The one that I found worked the best was this data source active. And so what I can do is I know the actual data source that's being opened in this case, right? The sales order or the sales table and the sales line, right? Those are the two being used. In my case, right, I want to go to the sales table method, go to the onactivated event on this, copy that event handler, and be able to take this and put this code in a project of mine, right? And so the key point here is that what I'm going to do in this case is listen or subscribe to the event of when that sales table on the sales table form. It gets a little confusing here. There's a sales table form, then a sales table data source. When that data source is marked as activated, right, I want this event to fire because this is going to give me the ability to actually look at the form data source and get the actual sales order that was opened. So that sender.cursor at the beginning is going to give me the actual sales order header record that was actually opened. And then I can actually create my event that I want to log from that, and then use the Application Insights telemetry logger class to actually log this event, right? So I'm going to go and basically say I'm opening the sales order, provide a sales ID and a sales name. That's going to be my event. The name of my event overall is going to be view sales order, right? And then if I call that .track event, right, I can actually fire this to actually go out and create that telemetry data record from that. So now when I go in and actually launch this, right, and go to a sales order, open that sales order up, you're going to be able to see in this case that we are capturing this this event, right, and it's under that custom events table in your Application Insights, right? So again, this is a different event type, right, between exceptions and page views that we looked at previously. This custom events is going to store any of the events that you yourself, right, are actually creating and using the telemetry functionality to actually store, right? So again, you're able to get all of the same information we were looking at earlier, right? The user, the date and time, legal entity, all of that. But in this case, it's also going to capture the event ID, right? Is going to be the data that you provide. In this case, we can see the sales order ID and name that's being opened in this case, right? So we're actually able to get that, right? So you can see how potentially this could be super powerful, so that we are able to, this is just one example of how we're able to utilize this, right? You can absolutely take this and run with it and utilize it elsewhere as well. All right, so what does this look like if we want to query that telemetry data via code, right? So we've looked at being able to take that telemetry data and export it to like Power BI, right? But what does this look like if we want to export this and query this via code? So one of the things we can do in this case is actually utilize the logs query client, which is a package from Microsoft itself that is built for querying these types of logs. You connect to it with a client ID and secret and a tenant ID, just like you do everything else within Azure. And then you're able to create you give it a workspace ID, which again comes from the metadata of that workspace itself when you create it within that resource within Azure. And then you can actually provide it a query. So this is how we can make it so that we can be somewhat dynamic about how we want to actually query this data. And the data itself, in this case, we can query it via a language called KQL, or the Kusto Query Language, right? So it's very similar if you've done like SQL querying or any sort of database querying language. It's very similar to that. The syntax is obviously slightly different, but it's very similar, right? I'm going to select from this object. I'm going to provide where statements. I can, do all sorts of aggregate functions, sum, max, all of that, right? And I'm able to then create this query that I would like to perform and actually provide it to the client, the logs query client, and actually perform that, right? So in this case, I'm not doing anything too crazy as far as, just being able to wanting to just see the raw data that's being, or from a page views perspective, right? I want to be able to see the users, the pages that they're, forms that they're going to. So how do we actually use this in practice then? So one of the things that, or another example of how we can utilize this, right, is, well, let's go in and disable a user that hasn't logged in for a set time frame, right? So we used to be able to do this via the sysuser log, which is a table within F&O, but that's been deprecated. And so then this would be a function that could take the replace that functionality, right? Where we're able to go in and say, okay, well, now I want to go in and use telemetry data. I'm going to look for the last time that somebody actually went to a page that's not the default dashboard, right? So they didn't just log in, they actually went to somewhere else in the application, and I'm going to get all of those users in the system, right? So you can see in this case, I'm using that max aggregate function, right, to actually get the last time that somebody went to a particular form, and I'm going to actually summarize this by the user, right? So that's your group by functionality in this case, right? So I'm able to get the last time that the users went to some page, right, in the F&O application. I can then wrap this in a project, a .NET project within an X++ solution. So I've found that it's much easier to try and do these types of calls from a .NET class, right? Because you then get all of your the NuGet goodies, right? The pre-built packages from Microsoft and all of that. So it's much easier to have a .NET project within your X++ solution to make these types of calls. The example that we're going to walk through today is I slightly took a shortcut where I'm storing the client ID and secret in code, which obviously is not best practice, but just wanted to show what this would kind of look like. So then I created a batch job, right? The batch job will run on some periodic basis and be able to go out and get the logged on users, right? So we can actually see in this case, the last time that somebody has actually logged onto the system. It'll then go through each of the users and see if they exist in the F&O application and see if they show up in that get logged on users. It also does a check here to see if the user is sysadmin, because we don't want to delete a user that is sysadmin. And then if neither of those, if they don't show up in the list and they're not a sysadmin, it'll actually go and disable the user in that case, right? And so this functionality will actually be added to the F&O admin toolkit that I help lead, that we'll talk about here in a bit too. But you'll notice that we're going to start using telemetry data in that application as well. All right, so what does this kind of look like, right? If we actually deploy this, right, and we start to try and use this from a batch job perspective, right? In this case, we can see that we're able to go in and set up a batch job. It'll prompt us for how many days we actually want to go back in time, right? So we can say, 90, 180, 365, whatever value we would like. And the query will go that far back, see if the user is logged in. If they are, it'll show up in the query. If not, right, those users will get disabled. So now we have a quick demo. So first and foremost, I wanted to go and show what this kind of looks like in practice. So, all right. So first and foremost, I'll go in and show where this is actually, we have this feature enabled in this environment. So we'll see that the monitoring and telemetry parameters menu here is already lit up. If we go in here, this is where we can do our setup again, right? So we can pick which types of events we would like to do or which we would like to track. We can get our environment information. So this is where we would put in the environment ID that we're connected to, the environment mode or type here. And then this is where you put that instrumentation key and connection string, right? So this is the setup from the F&O side. In the Azure Azure portal side, I've created an App Insights container here. Go ahead and go to the overview, right? So you can go in and actually see just a simple App Insights container. Under the logs is where I can actually go and actually query all of this data. So one of the things that I've already set up here is I have some queries that I've already created. So one of the things we can do here is actually go in and see the query that we're running. So we can see here, again, we're starting from our page views. We can see a where timestamp, right? So we're basically saying, show me everything that's the users went to in the last 90 days. I can say, hey, I don't want to see anytime they go to the default dashboard of the company chooser, right? I only care about when they actually go to forms or pages within the app. I can set which F&O instance. I actually have multiple F&O environments pointed to the same App Insights container. So I can set my cloud instance here, which will only show me the instance that I care about. And then I can summarize this, show me the max time or the last usage here by user ID, menu item, and instance, right? So I can get all of that information from here, right? And you're able to go through and see that information, right? I talked about the different event types, the buckets that you have, right? This is where these tables function here are the different event types, how they're actually stored, right? So you're able to see page views, exceptions, right? Your custom metric, custom events, right, that we looked at, right? So all of these are stored in separate tables within this log analytics workspace, and then you can query those from here. So that's what the data looks like that we're actually querying. Again, we use the data itself the query language that we're using is called KQL. That's why you see KQL mode up here to actually query this. The share function that we talked about, right? If you actually want to export this to CSV, open in Excel, or to Power BI is right here. If I go ahead and click the export right to Power BI like we were showing, this is actually going to show the text file that's actually generated. This is actually the entire query, right? I can literally copy and paste this into Power BI and it will light up. So if we wanted to show what that looks like, I have the Power BI file that I used actually set up here. The query that actually gets this data, it's over here. And I'll show that this is literally just, sorry, let me get this pulled up. Right, this is just me copy and pasting the data or the text file that was generated right into my query itself. So I'm able to just copy and paste that, apply it, and you will generate the data here. And you can see that I'm able to bring all of the different columns on this data. Right, I could add to any of the visualizations that I would like. Right, so really powerful stuff there to be able to do that. All right. And then we can jump into some of the code stuff that we kind of talked about. So first and foremost, let's see. I can show that sales table option that or the code behind that, where we're actually able to see the sales order being opened, right? So the only thing that I did here was go to sales table, right? Open the actual sales table up in our designer here. Go into the events, look at the data source, the unactivated, which should be, so we would pull that unactivated over. We would have to go to the form. That's why, sorry. But we would go to the form, grab the sales table unactivated, right? So there's a sales table form, which has a sales table data source. We'd look at the activated option here. And so when that data source is actually activated on this form, this event will fire. We can subscribe to that event. And this is where we have the sales table object then, right? And we can create this. So anytime we call this track event method on that Sys Application Insights telemetry logger, right? That actually will send the action over to our log analytics, and it could be captured. So if we want to see what that looks like, right, we can make a new query. We can go against our custom events, right? And you can see that I actually did this last night to make sure everything was still working, right? And we're able to see that I actually went over and opened a particular sales order, right? The admin user is captured, right? So we're able to see when that event, when that action occurs. All right. So that's from the sales table perspective. If I want to then look at the logs, or actually being able to query this from code, right? You'll notice that I actually have AM telemetry project here, or solution. I have an X++ project as well as a .NET project living within one application or one solution here. That's super helpful in my case because I want to be able to use all of these references that I'm going to have from a different Microsoft packages, right? So because this is .NET now, I do have the ability to go and actually manage my NuGet packages, and I'm able to utilize all of the Microsoft Azure, like Azure Core, Azure Identity, Azure Monitor Query, which is actually what the package that is going to allow us to query the log analytics or app insights container, right? And then we can go in, we can create our client, we can provide the query that we actually want to execute in this case. And then we can actually call this query workspace and provide the workspace ID, the query we want to run, and then the time range that we want to run it for, right? So all of that data is a part of the request itself. You then would get a read-only list of the objects coming back, and then we can return that, right? So that's kind of the idea of doing this in the .NET side. This entire process is much easier, in my opinion, on the .NET side to perform. But what does this look like from a batch job perspective, right? So we can create this AM telemetry batch job in this case, right? We can call this run base batch to make it a batch job. And then in our run method here, right, we would be able to then go and call that list user last login. We would provide the input parameter from our the batch job itself. We would run through the same functionality that we kind of talked about, where we're going to loop through all of our users, see if that user exists in our user list that they've logged in, check if they're a sysadmin or not, and then update this. And I think I put that check somewhere else, but yeah, anyway, that's the idea in that case, right? So then once we set the batch job up, right, we could schedule this batch job to be ran on a periodic basis, and that would be performed there, right? So this is how we can start to utilize this functionality back into have F&O generate the telemetry data and then consume that telemetry data back into F&O itself, right? To help with the administration of the application. Awesome. All right, so let's go ahead. We have a little bit of time here. So let's go ahead and actually show what this looks like. So if I'll jump around here a little bit just to show that this is actually capturing things. So if I go, for example, to a particular page, we'll let this load, and then we can go and see that in our app insights. One of the questions that I get quite frequently about this is how quickly does it actually, record this, right? How long does it take to actually, log that a user went to this page? And the best answer that I can give is it depends. There are some times where I can't get over to log analytics fast enough to actually perform the query for it to show up. And there are other times that I will come in here and it'll take multiple minutes for this to show up. So if I were to just do a raw, look at this. So we can see that for today, right, it's been capturing when I went to, the last time it actually picked something up was very recently, actually. All right. So we can see we're still waiting for it to come across. Right. So you can see that in this case, it's going to take, of course, it's going to take some time because we're doing a live demo. But we'll go and jump through some other, we'll go to purchase orders too and see. All right, so you can see in this case, the VIN table list page finally showed up over here, right? So in that case, it wasn't terrible, probably 30 seconds to a minute before it actually picked it up. Like I said, sometimes especially in dev environments, it can be much slower, just simply because your dev environment's slower, but normally it's completed. It's gotten better performance-wise through the different versions. So it's down to, in this case, probably between 30 seconds and a minute in most cases. All right. So that's your page views, right? If we actually want to see that, since we have it all set up, I'll actually go to a sales order and I can show that that is, our custom event query is executing. So if we want to actually go to the sales order itself, we have the custom code that I showed in our in this environment. I'll go ahead and open this Kusto Retail Miami 012492 sales order here. We'll let this open. I think this environment knows that it's on a demo right now, live demo. All right, so we open that sales order. So what I'll do is I'll actually come and grab my custom events here, like this. We'll see how long this takes to come over. So waiting for that sales order event to come over. Go and make sure it's happening here. But yeah, so that's the process that we would. There it is. All right. So finally came across. We can see that the 012492 Kusto Retail Miami was the event, right? My view sales order, right? So I could have multiple different event types, right? I could put whatever string I want in this event ID to tell me more information. But you can see I still get, the date and time that the change or that the event occurred on, the user that performed it, right? I'm logged in as admin, right? But we're able to see that all occurred here. All right. So in that case, then I will go ahead. At the end of this slide deck, I will show, there are quite a few different resources in this case. I've written about the telemetry data topic quite a bit. And you'll notice that a lot of these match up to different areas that we've talked about, right? How to enable the telemetry data, what is it? How can we use that telemetry data for read auditing? I did put a link here to the admin toolkit as well. The admin toolkit is a free tool on GitHub that I helped start, and then a number of different people in the community started contributing to. But it basically helps with a number of different processes that you would utilize as an administrator or IT functionality within F&O itself. So if you're curious on what that can do, feel free to check that out. And then if you want to take this a step further and you want to see how the FastPath team is utilizing some of this telemetry data for security, audit, and compliance and user licensing as well, optimization, feel free to reach out to me after this as well. So I've left a lot of time here at the end for questions on purpose because I know that this can be a large topic. So I'm hoping that there's some questions here that we can kind of go over and dive into from a telemetry perspective on that front. But I'll leave my contact information up here, the GitHub where you can get that admin toolkit, my Twitter and security course and blog that I write on quite frequently. And then this slide deck, I'm sure will be sent out as well as part of the event itself, but I'll also host it on my website as well. So I don't know if there's a way for me to see if there are questions or if I'm missing that. I don't know if there's some. All right. So the first question here is around, is it better to create separate resources for production and test? That is a great question. I have seen it done both ways. And I believe the question here is referring to whether it's better to create separate App Insight resources, one for testing, one for prod. You can do it either way. The biggest thing I will say that it probably makes sense to separate out production from non-production data that you have. Your non-production data, I feel, you could probably put multiple instances within one container, but I would probably recommend separating your production from non-production in that case. Another one is performance impact. Yeah, especially the telemetry data functionality itself. If you're just using telemetry, I have not seen a huge impact of if you enable it, simply because Microsoft is already capturing the telemetry data, right? If you open a support case or if you go through a licensing renewal, anything like that, you'll notice that they pull in, they'll utilize the telemetry data that they have, right? So the functionality is enabled on an environment, whether you are enabling it or not. So there isn't a huge impact there. I will say if you start hooking in using telemetry data in events or subscribing to events and then using telemetry data, that's where I've seen clients have issues with performance and things like that. So definitely keep that in mind. But that's a great question about the large number of transactions. I will honestly say that I have not done a deep dive into if you're trying to run through a batch job and for whatever reason it's hitting the telemetry functionality, if you're logging something during a super big background process, something like that, to do a performance impact there. So that's something that I could probably do in a future blog post. Yeah. So one of the questions was, does this work properly in versions 10.40 and before? There definitely were a couple versions in there. I know 39 was impacted, and there's probably some others in there where Microsoft inadvertently introduced a bug where every action was tracked by the same user, right? So there's definitely versions prior to 41 where there are bugs in it. That's why my recommendation is if you are going to use the tool, make sure you're on the latest version you can be of F&O because of that. What kind of costs are associated with the Azure component? Do the costs increase depending on the volume of the data being logged? Yes. So you're going to pay, log analytics is much cheaper than like X++ or Power Apps, Dataverse type storage, but you are going to pay, for the data that you log. So there is functionality around the log analytics, App Insights functionality to, you can trim data, you can, purge certain data, right? So there is functionality around that to help do data management, but it is something that you want to keep in mind as part of this. Now, looking at the grand scheme of things, right? If you have an F&O implementation, right? And, Power Apps and everything else, the cost of your the log analytics is probably going to be minuscule in comparison, but it is something that you want to keep in mind. Yeah, as was stated, retention rules on the tables, can keep costs under control. Yeah, and you can, I guess, if you want to try and use telemetry data to show which parts of a project team aren't testing or aren't performing their what they should be doing on a day-to-day basis, you can do that. In terms of performance, we implemented a lot of events metrics ourselves that are logged into App Insights. We added something on top of that X++ framework so we can switch on and off event metrics. So if a certain metric event generate too much logging, we can easily turn it off. That's a great idea, actually, to actually put an additional check above as part of your code. If you're going to be utilizing this, in depth, right? And you're going to use it to have another way, so you don't have to go and turn off events for everyone. You can pick and choose which events you want to actually log in code. That's a really good idea. The next question is about an actual error that is being encountered as part of this. I would have to see what that error is and what actions you're doing to perform that. It looks like there's some issue with the sales line BI entity and change tracking. Yeah. So the question is, how does this work when applied to a UAT testing environment? Is the data still viewable and separate in Azure? So you can either, yes, the data is still visible. Where it's actually stored is dependent on how you set up your configuration, right? So you can either have a completely separate Azure App Insights container for your UAT testing. And then when you set that up, you would actually select your in the environment mode drop down, right? You had development, test, or UAT, I think, in production. All right. So you could select which type of environment it is, and that will help to give it, will categorize the data for you, as well as you still have on each entry that's logged in log analytics, right? You have your instance ID in there, right? So you can actually see which F&O instance it comes from. Is this replacing the LCS telemetry? Will it be able to identify performance issues and slow performance SQL queries, or is more application log for events and errors? That's a great question. So LCS in its entirety, right, is slowly being moved over to, PPAC and data, or the Power Platform, Dataverse. Like, we're starting to make that trend. So this definitely would take the place of anything that existed within LCS as far as long-running queries and things like that. So as those haven't been deprecated as of yet, as far as I know, but as those features start to be turned off in LCS, right, this would be the place, or the telemetry data functionality would be where you would see that. If you kind of want to see the roadmap that I could foresee this going down as far as how the telemetry data will be used, if you look at our friends on the BC side, the BC crew utilizes telemetry data much more extensively than anybody on the F&O side currently. So they have a lot of really, really cool tools that they've built into the application already. So if you want to see where F&O could go, right, just take a look at some of those some of that functionality as well. Posts here. A lot of really, really great conversation in the chat. So I appreciate everyone paying attention and getting all of their ideas, and really like to see that. Yeah. So one of the questions about logging can generate a huge amount of data, right? How can we archiving or data cleansing be enabled, right? So there's retention policies and things that you can do on the log analytics or App Insights container itself to perform that. Yeah, as was mentioned, somebody answered it for me. Yeah, what type of performance? Yeah, so what type of performance can we get from this kind of monitoring with standard events, like time to open a form, executing a query, or invoking a class method? Yeah, so we can, let's see if I jump into, right, and we just run like a page views. I didn't really get too far into this, but like a lot of information in the results, like you can actually see, where's that at, right? So you see performance bucket, right? You can see the type that we're seeing here. So you can actually see how long it's taking for this to open. If you wanted to get your like custom traces, right? If you actually wanted to start doing more performance analysis you could do it there. There's some like I said, there's rudimentary stuff in here to show like how long it took and the duration that it took to actually open this. So they are timing those, but just wanted to point that out. Awesome. Well, I am looking like I need to stop sharing and get out of here. So thank you, everybody, for joining the session today. If you have any questions after, feel free to reach out. I hope you have a great rest of your DynamicsCon virtual day here. And thanks again for joining the session.